Which number? Which page?
So the next one is 80.
80?
80, 80.
80. So maybe Nitai, maybe you can tell us the significance of singing all these beautiful songs for us.
Well, long story short, like all these prayers, they're all prayers, but in essence, like this whole place, we're trying to cultivate a spiritual practice. This is a spiritual practice, you know. It's not something that you see with your eyes. It's something that happens inside. It's not like some kind of, like something that you can see under a test tube lab, you know, like some magnifying glass. It's not so obvious. The results are not quick. Yeah, it's one of those things. It takes a long time, and it's not even something to do with time. It's to do with sincerity, and spiritual cultivation is, you know, it's just that. It takes a lot of dedication and, you know, devotion and time. But these prayers, they're all invocations for, long story short, like basically trying to invoke mercy into our life, like blessings. You know, the blessings, Krishna's mercy, God's mercy into our life. So it's not like, you know, when people say stuff like, well, if God was real, why doesn't he just show himself to me, right? That's a very common thing. So, and then there's also, God can't be real because every time I ask for him to show up, he doesn't show up, so he can't be real. So it's actually not so much that we have the capacity to just say these things whimsically and then God whimsically just shows himself like, yeah, I'm real. It's not as easy as that. And actually it's kind of a little bit arrogant. It's actually the other way around. It's more like, if God can't give you mercy, then he can't. Like, if God doesn't, like, what is it? It's like, if the finite cannot know the infinite, so we're finite, we're limited. If he cannot know the infinite, then that means there is no infinite. That's one of the arguments. But it's actually the other way around. So one of our teachers, the Guru Maharaj, the founder of this movement, he said, no, if the infinite, so if God cannot reveal himself to us, then he's not real. Then it can't be real. So what we're talking about is mercy overall. And all these songs, they're all compilation of different sentiments throughout history of these different wonderful saints, and they have wrote like all these beautiful like poems and expressions of deep sentiment between themselves and the Lord and God. You know, like these are not just like, you know, like something which sounds nice, or oh, that's quite romantic, or that's quite nice to listen to. This is actually how they feel about themselves. And some of these songs, they're very touching and so on, but the point is, all these songs and poems or whatever, they're all done through a medium of chanting and singing and music, and it's a sound vibration. But ultimately, if you notice, like in the end of every song that we do, generally we finish with like this mantra here, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is a prayer or a call to the original divine couple, Radha and Krishna. So it's God in the ultimate sense of being male and female. So the male aspect of God and the female aspect of God, the divine couple, Radha and Krishna. Maybe you know a little bit about them, maybe you don't, but you know, it's not something that you're gonna like just learn straight away if you don't. It takes time, so we encourage you to keep coming. But in this age, especially now, these times, this is in the scriptures, they would call this Kali Yuga. So I don't want to keep rambling on because this is a kirtan session. It's not really like a lecture or something right now. But at this age, it's prescribed in the scriptures, in the holy text. They prescribe chanting together, congregational chanting through the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And this transcendental sound vibration, Hare is the energy, the energy of Srimati Radharani, you know, Hare. And then Krishna is the male aspect of God. Krishna is himself. So we're calling out to them to engage us in spiritual practices, spiritual cultivation of selflessness, because if we could all be selfless, think about it, like in the whole world. Imagine everyone was selfless. Could you imagine that? If everyone was, what kind of a world would we live in? Would we live in a better world than we are currently? What do you think? I mean, I don't know. I think so. I mean, if everyone was selfless, I mean, it would just be like it would be paradise, right? So a lot of people they try to fix the world, but they don't fix themselves. So all this chanting and all these prayers and everything, we're trying to, call out for mercy and, so that we can change as people ourselves and apply these things, not just oh, help me, but actually try to apply these things through spiritual practices. And this is one of the spiritual practices that we do, is the chanting, the sound, which is very powerful and it can change your life. So, it's not a walk in the park, but because, this isn't some kind of like, oh, here you go, have some magic pill that will sort your life out. This is a real thing, but it's as much as you're able to dedicate yourself to. If you put a lot of time and effort into it, it can change your life for the better, Like, it's changed my life, definitely. Like, I'm just saying from experience. And, it's not something you're going to, we can't take it underneath a microscope and see it straight away. It takes time. But, so this is what we're doing here in this temple. We chant, we try and do selfless acts of devotion with one another and stuff. And we do that by chanting together and trying to invoke that into our lives, through the medium of sound and music. So, okay, anyway, sorry. Okay, page 80. So this is a prayer to one of the saints. His name is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He's one of the founding acharyas of Krishna consciousness.
That's him right there.
Yeah, this picture on the very right. And he was, an exemplary person for his whole life. He was very strict with himself, and everything he did was generally done with so much sincerity and love of God, and he taught that to the whole world. So we're praying to him, we're trying to invoke his mercy so that we can, become better people and serve more and be more selfless. So we all these different prayers are, Anyway, right, so let's begin. So you're gonna have the translation here as well in English. So, okay. Sujana Buddharadhita Padayogam Yogadama Duran Dharapatavam Sujana Buddharadhita Padayogam Yogadama Duran Varanamaya Dayaka Puja Baba Gaura Bhuvan Bhuvaneswari Kirtita
नयनियागनार्पित गौरपदा
नयनियागनार्पित गौरपदा
नयनियागनार्पित गौरपदा
नयनियागनार्पित गौरपदा
प्रणमामि सदा प्रभुपाद प्रणमामि सदा
Gaura Hari, Gaura Hari, Gaura Hari.
Hare Krishna.
Talk about today the disappearance day of a saint called Lochan Das Thakur.
We have a new friend here, Caroline.
Hi. Nice to meet
Caroline has been exposed to Buddhism. So she was wondering about a little bit what is the
you.
difference.
The connection
Yeah.
between Buddhism and Bhakti. Buddhism and Bhakti Yoga. Well, they both, you say, in terms of religious history, from an academic perspective, they both come out of India. Originally in India, the tradition of spirituality was known as Vedic culture. People followed the Vedas. And although the Vedas can be seen as 4 books, 4 kind of foundational texts, known as the Sama Veda, the Yaja Veda, Rig Veda, and the Atharva Veda. They're books dealing with different elements of theology and religious practice and ritual. But the Vedic knowledge is broader than just what is contained in 4 books. It's considered timeless. So, although religious knowledge, we call it religious. Sometimes the word religious has connotations these days. Largely because it's been misrepresented over the centuries by people who have presented themselves as religious, but they're not actually holy men or women. Rather, they are involved in religion for selfish or exploitative reasons, and thus, but dressed in religious garb. And thus, eventually, their real position, their real motivation is exposed, which eventually it is, the truth must come out. People lose their faith once that takes place. People see that the so-called holy people, the so-called societies or groups designed to cultivate the higher qualities, the higher human, tap into the higher human levels of consciousness, are actually involved in base activities. So there's a gross hypocrisy going on. And then people lose their faith, naturally. You put your faith in something, you find out eventually that it's something that you didn't initially believe it to be. You lose your faith. But, so religious, the word religion has some connotations these days. But, real religion, the word religion, has its roots, I believe, in Latin. Religio. Re means to return to something for a second time, to revisit something. And ligio means to link, to connect. So etymologically connected to the word ligament, which anatomically will connect the muscle to the bone, if I remember correctly, or the muscle to the muscle. Ligament and a tendon. I think tendon is muscle to muscle and ligament is muscle to bone. But anyway, to link something. So religio means to relink. What are we relinking with? We're relinking with something that is our original nature, something that we had before. Otherwise it would just be link. It wouldn't be relink. So the real idea of religion is to relink with something that has been there before. Something that is part of our true inherent nature. Something that is actually who we are, and that we've lost contact with that somehow over time. So religion means to relink with the truth, to relink with who we are. And thus it's also sometimes called self-realization. There's a book written by one of the saints in our tradition called The Science of Self-Realization. So in this sense, the Vedic corpus of knowledge is not contained just to 4 books, but it's a timeless truth, which is always existing, but which has been lost through a misguided enterprise, misguided human enterprise. Making the wrong choices, you get the wrong results. And you lose touch with what really makes you happy, provides satisfaction, with the truth. So Vedic knowledge, or the Vedic literature, or the Vedic phenomenon, is known as Sanatan Dharma. And Sanatan means like the eternal faith and religion are the wrong words, but the eternal condition or position, or sometimes translated as the eternal occupation of every conscious entity. That the idea being that every conscious entity has a commonality. It's an egalitarian concept where there is equality on the level of consciousness. And there's not just equality in terms of identity, but there's also equality in terms of what generates happiness for consciousness. Realizing the potential of existence. What is the meaning and the purpose of existence? So the Vedic knowledge is meant to present that and guide a person in the process of realizing that or re-realizing that. So it's known as Sanatan Dharma, and Sanatan in this sense means it's eternal, that it never actually ends. There's no beginning or no end for something to qualify as eternal. But it can be forgotten. And just as it can be forgotten, it can also be remembered. Now the process of how it is forgotten is would require some elaboration, but which it certainly can be given. But without going into that, the point being is that the condition that we find ourselves in now is undeniably substandard. It has got too many problems intrinsically attached to it for it to be called utopian, for it even to be called acceptable. What to speak of utopian or ideal? And the Vedic, so in guiding us back to this place of perfection, the Vedas describe or delineate 4 basic reasons why the current condition, we call it the current human condition, is unacceptable. One is that there needs to be birth. And with birth comes death. There is inevitability. So birth seems to be the production of life, or the coming into being of consciousness, at least in a human form. Consciousness comes into a human body. But as soon as that happens, then death is also an inevitability. Also, you have to grow old. So the body provides a certain amount of scope for the consciousness to interact with the environment, for the consciousness to interact in an endeavor to generate pleasure and happiness, to generate some kind of fulfilling meaning, some kind of purpose, which is ultimately happiness. Whatever might be the secondary motive, ultimately when you dig deep, the primary root motive of all endeavor of all conscious living beings is the generation of happiness and the avoidance of pain. So in the pursuit of that, consciousness has at its disposal this physical body and the mind. And using these tools, it's attempting to fulfill itself, attempting to procure happiness, to find fulfillment and purpose. So the Vedas say how these tools, the body and the mind, are deficient because essentially they're temporary. Whereas any kind of satisfaction that is fulfilling, happiness, has to be permanent. If it's temporary, what sort of happiness is it? Why go in for something if it offers you just a temporary feeling of happiness and then it goes? So the Vedas, the Vedic knowledge, the Vedic understanding is that when when trying to realize who you actually are, the first understanding is that you are eternal. But the body is not eternal. This body is not going to last eternally, right? It's a cold, hard fact. So the difference between our condition now and an ideal condition that the Vedas describe as our actual identity, our actual self, is simply misidentification. People thinking that who they actually are is this body. They believe that this physical encasement through which their consciousness is expressing itself and interfacing with the outside world, they believe that that is actually them. And that when this body dies, consciousness fades away into nothing. So the Vedas come to tell us and enlighten us, educate us gradually out of this condition for the purpose, and again, religion sometimes has bad connotations, but to relink us with something for our own well-being, for our own happiness. So it's not just educational, but it's done out of the greatest of benevolence, because it leads one on a path and to a destination that is satisfying, and not just temporarily satisfying and stimulating, but eternally satisfying. So the Vedas identify 4 factors, reasons, why this search for happiness, as we know it today, as we see exhibited in society, by pretty much everyone in society, in different ways according to their level of intelligence. Some people feel that smoking cigarettes produces happiness, and it does on one level. But on a long-term level, it doesn't. Someone else with a heightened awareness can see that that habit does not actually produce happiness in the end. Once a balance of factors are weighed up, the net effect is misery. But at a certain level of consciousness is deemed to be happiness. And when that is extrapolated, the Vedic understanding, the Krishna conscious understanding, or let's just say the spiritual understanding, is that concept can be extrapolated. So for a certain level of consciousness, using the example of the smoking tobacco, that is considered happiness. But someone at a more enlightened state or more evolved state of consciousness can see it exactly for what it is. So as someone's consciousness evolves, what is deemed happiness, what is deemed a worthy, productive pursuit capable of generating happiness, is recognized exactly for what it is, as incapable of actually producing long-term happiness. And this is a gradual and evolutionary process, is the actual process of religion, of spiritual enlightenment, as one's consciousness gradually evolves. One of our gurus called it subjective evolution. Our grandfather guru, he called it subjective evolution. That inside one is evolving. As one evolves inside, gradually, or as that happens, correspondingly, their relationship with the outside world also changes. Just like if one receives some education, their relationship with the tobacco smoking changes. They see it for what it is. They see it more accurately. So as one engages with the Vedic understanding and grows themselves internally, they evolve. The consciousness grows and begins to express itself in subtler and subtler vibrations, cleaner and pure consciousness. Then the relationship, how they view the outside world, also changes. And what all of society is deeming to be worthy of their time and their energy is seen really as kind of a trivial and pursuit based on a misguided idea of what will make them happy. And then one becomes slowly, they become what is known as transcendental, which is believe it or not, it's an English word, but it means above the control and the domination of the physical world to start with, then the mental world, then the intellectual world. Gradually, they move closer and closer to who we actually are, and achieve ultimately a state of self-realization, self-awareness, self-actualization, whatever term you want to use, where they see themselves for who they are. And once you see yourself for who you are, you see what can and cannot satisfy you. And that is the real purpose of religion, to see yourself for who you are. That is the first point. And up till that point, we can say that Buddhism and Bhakti share a lot of commonality. Buddhism will say that there's no satisfaction to be found in the outside world. The satisfaction is to be found within. That every action has an equal and opposite reaction, which is karma. Every reaction has a preceding action of equal intensity but opposite direction. The same nature, but coming the other way. So every action is producing a reaction, and that reaction is linking us to something that we're not. So the Buddhist idea is that if you retire from that, if you cease action, if you go within, then slowly your generation of karma, that karmic cycle which is characterized in different ways by action, reaction, samsara, birth and death, that gradually slows down. One's karmic account is gradually reduced to the point where it becomes zero. And then one can pop out of orbit, so to speak. State called nirvana. So up to that level of freeing oneself from samsara, there is an area of commonality between bhakti and Buddhism. If we want to look at it historically, the Vedic knowledge, as mentioned, is considered eternal because it's intrinsic to the consciousness and its search for happiness. And the idea is that this Vedic knowledge comes from the Supreme Source. So it comes from divine consciousness, comes from God as such, comes from Krishna. But without going into the Krishna conception, which would be sidetracking you a little bit at this stage, that can be, the implications and the details of that can be described later. Divine knowledge comes through what's called a revelatory process. So the divine himself expresses this. And in our scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, he says, or we say God, he says that he gives it to the god of the sun, the deity of the sun, known as Vivashvan. And from Vivashvan it comes down to his son, Ikshvaku, etc., and into the world. Or there's other ways of descent, other channels, but ultimately the source is always the supreme consciousness, is always God. And with that revelation is gradually corroded due to association with the environment. With this illusory environment, it's gradually corroded. And the idea being that it goes through a renaissance from time to time. And so this is done 500 years ago by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is here up on the altar here. But that Vedic revelation was existing in India prior. So the Vedic revelation comes from God, comes from divine consciousness, and due to the corrupting effect of the environment, it can be exploited. So when Buddha came along, it was being exploited. And it was being exploited specifically in the area of animal killing, animal sacrifice. The Vedas do give a certain leeway, a certain permission for animals to be killed and eaten in a certain controlled, ritualistic manner. But this was being exploited. This is one main example being given of how revelation, when it originally comes from the Supreme, is pure, it's uncorrupted. But it very quickly becomes vitiated or corrupted. So this is what was happening. Now, this means that the real purpose of that knowledge was not being tapped into, was not being capitalized upon, but instead was being exploited, and the result was detrimental to the interests of society, was not producing a spiritual result. So what does Buddha say? He says, out with the Vedas. Stop following the Vedas. The Vedas are supposed to be a tool to help you achieve spiritual consciousness. But if they're not doing that, then you have to reject it. Like a vehicle, to get you from A to B, if it stops working, you have to reject the vehicle. At one time, the vehicle was a helpful tool to achieve your objective, but now it's not. So let it go. So this is what Buddha said. He said, let go of the Vedas. Reject them. Forget about them altogether. Reset. Start again. So that's what Buddha did. He reset, rejected the Vedas. And then, sometime after Buddha, came a person, great teacher, called Shankara, in the 8th century. Shankara. And he said, well, yes, what Buddha said is true, but the Vedas still have a utility. So he reintroduced the Vedas and taught that what Buddha said, this idea of nirvana, formless consciousness where there is no form, the enlightened state does not contain any form or any variety. It is just pure, undifferentiated consciousness with no form, no qualities, etc. So Shankara, in the 8th century, he says that, yes, this is true, but that form is not nothing. It's not nothingness, as the Buddhist doctrine teaches that ultimately there is nothing. Shankara says it is something. This consciousness is something, although it's formless. There are Sanskrit terms for all of these. Nirakara means no form. Nirguna means no qualities. Nirvishesha means no variety. So none of what we see here, distinction, variety, shape, color, temperature, whatever we use to quantify the objects of the environment, says that none of that exists in the enlightened state. So very similar to Buddhism, but one step removed. That yes, it is formless. It is without variety, without quality, nirguna, no qualities. But it is also something, not nothing. So Buddhism, but a step removed. And then after Shankara comes a teacher called Ramanuja in the 10th century, 11th century. And he teaches that, yes, consciousness is something, and that something also has some quality to it. So that something is not just formless, not just qualityless, not just shapeless, not without variety. It says that that thing is a person as well. That Supreme is a person. And then after Ramanuja comes another teacher called Madhva, who goes that, well, in the enlightened state, there is not just this divine person, but there is also other people who have a relationship with this divine person. That the individual soul has a relationship with the Supreme Soul. So we go from the nothingness, nirvikalpa, of Buddha, or the nirvana of Buddha, to the Advaita of Shankara. Formlessness, but some identity is there. To a more developed conception of identity coming with Ramanuja. And then the relationship of the supreme consciousness with the individual consciousness, which was presented as Dvaitava. Dvaita means two, jewel, with Ramanuja. And then finally we have Gauranga, or Lord Chaitanya, who we follow here. He presented a synthesis. So he said, yes, this supreme is one, but it's also two. So this philosophy is known as Achintya Bheda Bhed, where the soul is one with the supreme, which is seen as Shankara, and is seen as Buddhistic thought that the soul will merge with the pure sheet of consciousness. One in quality, but different in quantity. So simultaneously one, yet different. So there is a relationship of perfect compatibility between the individual consciousness and the supreme consciousness, but also dynamic interplay of love. So Mahaprabhu, at the end of this progression of theology, starting with Buddha, we could say starting with the Vedic literature, then it's rejection by Buddha, then it's slight into pure nothingness, and then the development of that into something, but still formless, by Shankara, and then from that formless into a personal state by Ramanuja, and then a dual state by Madhva, and then a completion of that circle into both dual and non-dual. Bheda Abheda by Gauranga Mahaprabhu, who appeared in 15th century, 500 and something years ago in India. So that is the theology, if you follow that progression that I just outlined. That is the theology of bhakti in relation to Buddhism. And in that, as we mentioned, up to a certain point, there shares similarity in the realm of removing ourselves from the negative. From the standpoint of interaction, search for happiness by interfacing, interacting with the outside world, is deemed to produce a negative result. It doesn't lead to happiness, not permanent happiness. It doesn't necessarily lead to permanent distress either. You can have prolonged periods of happiness, prolonged periods of distress. But neither of them possess that fundamental quality which is necessary to satisfy consciousness, and that's eternality. So it's a flux, happiness, distress, happiness. And even if you do the right things and live with awareness and perform actions that generate good results and are relatively happy, still you have to die and give it all up. So there's no possible way, whatever way you try and construe it, however you try and wrestle and wrangle it, there's no possible way that this world can produce happiness to the quality and the quantity that is necessary to satisfy consciousness, to satisfy you, me, and everyone else. So that standpoint, Buddhism and Bhakti are on the same page. However, as we touched on in this, when talking about the progression of the theology, Buddha's teachings was to reset. Buddha's teachings see the ultimate reality as nothingness. Whereas Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Bhakti sees that once you have come out of the samsara cycle, are you familiar with these terms like samsara?
Just a bit, because I'm also new to Buddhism.
Oh, I see. Well, I hope I didn't lose you on some of those concepts then.
I know a bit, but I not very mind.
Oh, I see. I thought you might have been into it for a few years or something.
No, actually I started like 2 months ago.
Okay,
You've done a big jump.
I see.
You're here.
Anyway, you should be able to follow most of the concepts, I think.
Very good.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wonderful.
Okay, good.
Thank you for your answer.
No worries. But we're not quite finished just yet. So up until the point of release from the cycle of karma, say release of the negative, then there's common ground. There's tremendous commonality. However, the perfected state in Buddha is seen as an escape from suffering. that is where Buddhism ends. And that is actually where bhakti begins. And that is where bhakti distinguishes itself from, you could say, other concepts of spirituality or religion. Because bhakti, at that point of escape, of freedom, of self-realization, that's where bhakti begins to blossom. And that's where the Krishna conception begins. Conception as in ideology. The Krishna ideology is that God does exist, there is supreme consciousness, and that the goal of life is to achieve a relationship with that consciousness. But that consciousness, although it does have a formless aspect, its ultimate expression is in form. But what form? The theistic conception, as seen in other faiths, and we make this comparative, make this comparative approach. It's not to demean or diminish any faith, because all faiths have their utility for people in certain times, places, and states of consciousness. They all have their utility. But nonetheless, if we want to go to the depth of the matter, we do need to make a comparative analysis. So, some faiths will see God as the all-powerful, or the all-knowing, right? Omnipotent, it's named for all-powerful, or all-knowing, omniscient. Someone who is powerful, wise, the controller, the creator. So these terms are also recognized. Actually, when someone first approaches the theistic meaning to see God as a person, to see the supreme consciousness as a person, that is the natural conception, the natural ideology, is that one sees God as, well, they must have created us. They must be controlling us. If they created the world, then they must be all-powerful, because we certainly can't create the world, so they must be all-powerful. And the world is full of such sophisticated complexity that they must be all-knowing as well. So these are the initial conceptions that arise when one approaches when one asks substantial questions and approaches the God conception of God, seeks God. And then the next question is, so what is our relationship with this person? With this God person? They're all powerful, so we must bow down to them. We must worship them as a powerful, and they protect us. They support us. They give us nourishment. So then it's like a service and a worship relationship, which is fine. The Krishna conception takes it a step further. So that God is all-powerful. God is all-knowing. God is the creator. But also, God is the most beautiful person.
Reality is beautiful.
And this is the distinction between what we practice here and what you'll find in other faiths. And again, not to diminish any other faiths, we're just telling you how it is, what we do here. So Krishna literally means all attractive, someone who is the most attractive person. So not only is God the most powerful, the most knowing, and the creator, etc., the most of everything, but also the most beautiful person. The idea being that you can establish a relationship with a very powerful person. You can establish a relationship with a very knowledgeable person. And there's a certain happiness that comes from that. But it's nothing compared to establishing a relationship with the most beautiful person. Because that's when the qualities of the heart really manifest. That's when the happiness that every conscious entity is seeking can really be fulfilled with beauty, ecstasy, loveliness, charm, sweetness. This is the Krishna conception. So God, in our understanding, and ultimately in the Vedic understanding, which, as expressed before, is revealed by God, finds its apotheosis, which means it's like its pinnacle in this conception of beauty, where power is forgotten, intellect and knowledge is forgotten. The relationship becomes one of sweetness and beauty, and that is believed to be the ultimate perfection of human existence, to find beauty, and to find that source of beauty which is not temporary and subject to the flaws and the frailties of beauty that we see in this world, which, as expressed, is essentially is temporary. But beauty that is ever fresh, that is eternal, and that is constantly growing. There's no limit, there's no constriction, and there's no termination of that beauty. So it's this very fulfilling and optimistic conception of God that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught and that we follow. And in this respect, us and God are seen as simultaneously one yet different. And in this way, that is the closest and most maximum, we could say, intimacy that can be expressed between a what we say, living being and the Supreme Being, where they're simultaneously one yet different. And that simultaneous oneness and difference is expressed in the sweetest, most deepest exchange of love, which is known as a Madhura relationship, Madhura Ras. So that is a synopsis of what bhakti is about. So bhakti, just to recap, takes off, you could say, where Buddhism finishes. Buddhism will finish in an escape from suffering, an escape from the illusion of the world, identifying with the physical body, identifying with the actions of the body and mind in terms of their ability to produce happiness, but then taking it a step further and finding a real identity in a loving exchange with the Supreme. But the Supreme not as the most powerful or all-knowing, but as the most beautiful person. Krishna, all attractive. So that's the basics. And it's worth noting that in this world is seen as a reflection of what is in the world of spirit. So there is attractive qualities, items that are persons, objects in the environment that we see as naturally that we naturally see as beautiful, attractive. And again, the Vedic literature identifies 6 qualities that are attractive qualities. One is strength, both physical and mental, psychological strength. The second is wealth, money. People with a lot of money are attractive to others. Fame, famous people are attractive. People want to be famous because they know it's going to make them attractive to others. They're seeking that loving relationship that they feel attraction can bring. And they feel fame can bring that attraction. And it will, to a certain extent. Of course, it still comes with all the inherent problems of seeking pleasure in a realm which is subject to corruption, not eternal, frail. Here 1 second, gone the next. So fame is the third one. And then, so we have strength, wealth, fame, and then beauty. Beautiful people, naturally, it doesn't need much explanation. Physically, emotionally, psychologically beautiful. So beauty is attractive. And then knowledge is number 5. People that are very knowledgeable. It's attractive. It's an attractive quality. And then number 6 is a little anti-intuitive. It's renunciation. A renounced person, someone who is aloof, self-sufficient. They don't need you. They don't need that. You might need something, but they don't. So someone that is lofty and aloof, renounced, that's also attractive. So there's 6 basic categories of what constitutes attraction given in Vedic literature. And wherever, if we analyze it, wherever we feel attracted to someone or something, it will fall under one of, or a mixture of those categories. Invariably will belong to one or more of those categories. Now, Krishna possesses all of those, but in an infinite capacity. So, completely, absolutely beautiful. So beauty, strength, fame, knowledge, renunciation, wealth, all of it in maximum infinite capacity. So what we identify as attractive in another person, we seek to develop a relationship with that in order to come in contact with that beauty and feel happiness ourselves. That's the driving force behind all action in this world. That is the common, basic, foundational motivator. Whatever else might come on the surface is simply a secondary motive. The ultimate motive is the search, the seeking of happiness. And it has shades of degrees of being misguided. So back to our cigarette smoking example. Someone might smoke a cigarette and they get some kind of happiness. But ultimately it produces unhappiness. So regardless of the shades of enlightenment, ultimately there's an inability of whatever we identify as possessing beauty, attractiveness in the world. There's an inability, as an intrinsic inability to give us permanent satisfaction. But God, possessing in unlimited quantity all of the attractive qualities, is singularly means exclusively that person, through connection with, we can achieve satisfaction, happiness. And that is the purpose in life, happiness. So that's the basic idea. Happy seekers. Seekers of happiness and fulfillment. And everything else, you could say, is subsidiary to that. Sometimes people get a little confused by dress, sacred markings, hairstyles, songs, they hear different languages, pictures, the deities, worship processes. All of these can be understood in that they are there to produce change in consciousness, the development of bhakti, which means devotion. So bhakti yoga means to relink with our original nature and to link with God through a process of love and devotion. That's the essential substance of it. To do away with the wild goose chase of search for happiness in this world, all its myriad of fantastical offerings, and seen as a mirage with a thirsty person in the desert, dehydrated. They see a mirage on the horizon. It looks like it will satisfy them. It has the appearance of something that will quench their thirst, make them feel good, give them happiness. But it's never there. They walk towards the mirage and it's always just on the distance. And that's the nature of the search for happiness in this world. Is that it appears, and it does a very good job of it. It's what is known as Maya, illusion. Like a magic trick. You see something, but it's not actually that. So the mirage, enjoyment, the quest for enjoyment in this world has been compared to the quest of a thirsty man in the desert chasing a mirage. That it's always there on the horizon. It's always visible, but it's never actually manifesting. It never actually becomes real. It never actually satisfies, quenches that thirst. When that is realized, then the search for an alternative, a properly satisfying, real alternative, can begin, and a person can understand what life is actually about. Get real with the actual purpose, finding actual happiness, real, permanent, eternal happiness. Going beyond birth, going beyond death, going beyond disease, old age. All of these things are unnatural to consciousness. But we're addicted to them. We're addicted to what they offer. Like a drug addict. Our grandfather Guru has described it like someone is addicted to drugs. They know it's bad. They know it's not giving them pleasure. Deep down they know. They're going to have to die. We have to die. There's only a certain amount of quality and quantity of pleasure we can get through our senses, through the eyes, nose, mouth, etc. Everything has to go. We don't think about it. We push it away. We have to leave it all behind. And then, in Vedic understanding, we've created links through our action, through our karma, and we have to come back again to sort that out, and again and again and again and again. Like a drug addict returns for his fix again and again and again and again. Until they finally come to the conclusion, enough is enough. Enough is enough. I'm seeking pleasure here, but it's not delivering, and it's causing me misery. And when a person comes to that point of, that firm point, that conclusive point, that's when the spiritual process begins. That's when the bhakti process begins for real. That's when they can start living their life for real in terms of what they actually, as a conscious unit, achieving that objective. And in this regard, the Vedas say, Utishtata jagrata prapya varani bodhata kurashana dharanashita. Wake up, arise. You are children of nectar. Taste that nectar. Wake up, act, have courage, go forward. You are destined to taste the nectar. So do it. Take action and do it. That's the clarion call, the big, wide, broad, generic call of the Vedas. Give up this messing around in the sandpit, looking for happiness in the sandpit. And as one grows spiritually, then everything is put gradually into perspective. It's not as if one can necessarily go from zero to spiritually enlightened in an instant. Generally, it's a gradual process, 99.9% of cases. And it's not a process without its challenges. But as one traverses the path and meets and deals with the challenges, they realize that any sacrifice, any austerity or self-discipline needed to traverse and grow on the path is more than worth it, is rewarded 10 times. And that is nothing. The sacrifice is nothing compared to the reward. So as one progresses on the path, then the Gita says, Krishna says in the Gita, that he shows them the way. So you don't have to be too concerned about, what do I do? You simply have to want it. If you want to go forward, then you will be shown the way. Krishna bestows light, shines light on the path. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam. That's the Sanskrit of the Gita. Dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upajanti te. That you light the way. Are there any questions or comments? Everything clear? Clear enough?
I wanted to ask about the mark. What does it mean?
It's called tilak. That's the name of the symbol. And it's formed of, as you can see, two vertical lines that join at this area between the eyebrows, and then the leaf shape on the nose. So it's called tilak. And a simple way of explaining it is that temples to God are marked with this symbol to show that this premise, this structure, is being used as a place to connect devotionally with God. So when the body is marked in the same way, it's to show that this structure is being used as a facility to connect lovingly with God, like a temple. That's a basic way of explaining it. There is more, you could say, esoteric interpretations, such as the two horizontal lines. One shows the Supreme, God, and the other shows the individual person, us. And that they connect, and the leaf itself is known as a tulsi leaf. In the greenhouse there, you see we cultivate tulsi, and she has it's a plant with a special quality of devotion, bhakti, plant that represents bhakti like a sacred plant. So this leaf is a tulsi leaf, so it represents bhakti. So when these two lines join, they join at the tulsi leaf to show that the individual soul and the Supreme Soul connect through bhakti, through devotion. So that's the gist, that's the interpretational gist, the essential meaning of it. Tilak. And it is generally from a sacred place, sacred river, the Ganga. That's generally the tilak that devotees will wear. It's from the Ganga. So it's from the clay on the banks of the Ganga. They harvest the clay and they filter it. They sometimes put it with some sandalwood oil or something to give it a little bit of a scent. But it's clay that's been kind of filtered and then put into blocks. You mix it with water and you paint it on. So that's the meaning of tilak. Is that, you understand that? Yeah. Yes. Anything else? Why do you shave your heads? Actually, my head is not, I shave. Traditionally, like a monk will shave on the... He hasn't been shaving, he's supposed to shave on the full moon. Traditionally, a monk will shave on the full moon.
It grows quite quickly, your hair. When it was... You were shaved up, when was it? Everybody shaved?
A few months ago, yeah.
Whenever it was, a few weeks ago.
Yeah, these are various symbols like trappings, paraphernalias of the culture in which bhakti yoga has grown and developed. So, although they are supplementary to bhakti, ultimately bhakti is of the heart. Love and devotion, they come from the heart. They don't come from anywhere else.
We don't have to shave ours.
So, although all the symbols, such as the tilak, and this is known as a sika, the bit at the back, also has an esoteric metaphysical significance. And these robes, this is known as a dhoti. And the colours like white or orange, although they have rationale and they are helpful, at the same time they are supplementary. They're not at all essential. One of our texts called the Brahma Samhita, which describes Krishna's realm and the nature of Krishna and Krishna's associates, Krishna's group, and the nature of his realm, is a beautiful description. It says that the way to connect with Krishna is through Atma Bhakto. Bhakti meaning devotion, love and devotion of the Atma, the soul. So that love and devotion that is intrinsic to the soul at present is being expressed, trying to look for love in ephemeral objects, temporary relationships, etc., as we've talked about. But that is how a connection is made with Krishna, with God, the all-attractive, is through the heart, through the devotion that is intrinsic to the soul being occupying this area of the body, central in the chest. It's where the soul sits. And so through the qualities of the heart, which are the qualities of the soul, ultimately, that is how connection with God is made. And everything else is there simply to support it, to help it along the way. The tilak, the dhoti, the worship, etc. Everything is here to support the development of bhakti in one's heart, the development of love and devotion, to open up one's heart like that to God. So there's no exploitation, there's no even conception of God as a judgmental figure or anything, but God is the most loving and beautiful person. There's some groups now, one group that says, some of the trappings, some of the paraphernalia are a distraction. People that are wanting to become acquainted with the bhakti process and tradition get distracted or put off by this what seemingly cultural phenomenon that encapsulates bhakti. So they prefer to do away with it. If you were to go to one group, you might see them in Levi jeans and a leather jacket. Jai Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But really, many of these things are helpful. Like a certain uniform. Like this is a kind of a uniform. So at one level, a uniform is very helpful. See a policeman wearing their uniform. It's for a reason. It's not arbitrary. It's not mindless. There's a reason why people wear a uniform. Because it serves a purpose. The uniform is not the purpose. The uniform is to serve a purpose. But then at another stage, one becomes a detective, the uniform might not be helpful. They take off the uniform. They might go undercover. They might dress in a suit and tie. Or they might dress in jeans and t-shirt. To serve the same purpose that the uniform served. But the scenario is different. So it's supplemental to a higher purpose. Sometimes the uniform is necessary. At certain stages, it's very helpful. To distinguish one necessary sometimes from outside society. You might not want to be part of outside society, pursuing their temporary, fleeting indulgences. Whatever it might be, you may be disgusted with that. You may have a higher knowledge. To them it might be someone looking at someone smoking cigarettes and thinking that they're experiencing happiness. Yes, temporary happiness. But you look at it and you go, that's not going to lead to long-term happiness. So you may not want to identify with people who you see indulging activities that they think is giving them happiness, but you can see from a spiritual perspective it's going to lead to long-term unhappiness. So you may want to wear a uniform to distinguish yourself from those people. And then at other times the uniform may be a hindrance. If you start to think, if you start to develop a feeling of superiority or a feeling of judgment or condemnation, that you are somehow purer, morally superior to others, that's not going to be good for opening up your heart. So in that sense, maybe you shouldn't wear a uniform. So everything is to be understood with a dose of common sense, rational approach with common sense. Anyway, I think that will do. Further questions? Your good self? No? Where are you from?
I live in Felton.
Oh, you're local?
Yeah.
You come here quite often, don't you?
I try to.
Yeah. I think I've seen your face before. All right, Arsi time, yeah? Yeah, bring the gong.
Gokula
righteous and Kashi Sushma Bhakti Nima Acharya Maharaj Ki
Jai.
Shri Chaitanya Sarvati Maharaj Acharya Ki Jai. Shri Paramahamsa Parivraja Acharya Righteous and Kashi Sushma Bhakti Sundar Lilaya Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Ram Vishnu Paramahamsa Parivraja Acharya Righteous and Kashi Sushma Bhakti Yaka Sridhara Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai.
Oh, this one's gone.